The LSAT has changed yet again. And if you're studying for the LSAT in August or beyond, there is a real chance you're studying the wrong way right now and you have no idea. Of course, the material hasn't changed, but what you're doing might have to change because the actual prep you're doing, the screen you've been practicing on, might not match the screen you sit down to on test day. And that gap will cost you time on the one part of this test where time hurts you the most. Now, this is one of a series of changes over the past several years, by the way. Logic games, of course, are off the LSAT. Then in January, LSAC dropped the comparative reading comp section for some test takers without warning. They didn't even bother to announce it. And now, starting in August, there are two more changes landing at the exact same time. Number one, the LSAT is moving back to being in person for almost everybody. And number two, the entire LSAT interface is getting a redesign. For those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005. I personally raised my own LSAT score up from a 152 to a 175. And so I've seen LSAC change the exam again and again, and I know exactly what trips people up. And so today I'm going to share with you the upcoming changes and how you should adjust your prep accordingly. So again, two big changes starting in August affecting everybody going forward. The first is where you are taking the LSAT. Starting in August, almost everybody is taking the LSAT in person at a Prometric testing center. That remote at-home option that most people have leaned on for the past several years, ever since the pandemic, is going away for the vast majority of test takers. There are a couple of exceptions, though, and I'll get to who exactly qualifies, but for most people taking the LSAT coming up, the at-home era is over. The second big change is the screen. LSAT is moving to a new testing interface. The user experience is going to change. Where you click around is getting redesigned. There are going to be new buttons for taking it, new layout, a different feel. Now, of course, the content of the LSAT is not changing. It's the same format, same scoring, the same skills that have been part of the LSAT for decades. Logical reasoning is still logical reasoning. Reading comp is still reading comp, for better or worse. What's changing is how you take the LSAT, where you will be, and the design of the screen. That is it. LSEC has been clear and upfront about this, even if not all the changes are welcome ones. Now, even if the LSAT content is the same, that doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything, right? It means that you have to change how you study, not what you study. But the room where you take it matters more than most people think. So does the software. And there is one change buried in the fine print that will separate those who prepared from those who just showed up and got surprised. Let's start with the move back to taking it in person, because that's the big change, getting all the headlines, and there's a reason behind why that's happening. The official version of this is simple. Starting in August 2026, almost everybody takes the LSAT, the multiple choice portion, that is in person at a Prometric testing center. Prometric is a company LSAC partners with, and there are hundreds of their locations across all 50 states as well as overseas. And these are not borrowed spaces in a random classroom at a university or a high school or a hotel ballroom like in the past. These are dedicated digital testing centers. They are built and staffed to run tests like the LSAT and other exams as well. And so if something goes wrong, which will happen to somebody somewhere inevitably, there is actual staff on site to fix it. Under the previous remote setup, you're left alone with a chat window and a prayer. So why is this happening? LSAC's stated reason is test security. They're not joking about that. That's not jargon. There have been reports of organized cheating services, some of them international, that figured out how to exploit weak spots in remote testing to help people cheat. And of course, there is real money in this, because a strong LSAT score is worth tens of thousands of dollars in getting into better law schools, which will change your whole career. And so that demand led to a supply. Because, I mean, think about it, right? When you let somebody take a high stakes exam alone from home, a webcam only sees one angle. It doesn't see whatever else might be going on. Can't prevent proxy test takers necessarily, or the capture of unreleased LSAT content. And so it became an arms race between the proctoring software and those trying to cheat on the exam. And which, of course, affects other people negatively, those who are not cheating, because law school admissions is a zero-sum contest. The LSAT is meant to compare you against other applicants. And so even if a thin slice of the scores at the top are fake, the whole ladder bends and breaks, and the honest person who grinds for 6 months to get a legit 172 is fighting against those who cheated. So when LSAC says this is about integrity, I believe this. I mean, they want to protect the honest people who are watching this right now. Moving back in person doesn't make cheating impossible, of course, nothing will, but it will make it a lot harder to do it. If you're taking the LSAT in person at a staffed testing center with proctors in the room and vetted equipment, it's a lot harder to game the LSAT. Now, remote LSAT test takers were only about 40% of everybody taking the LSAT, but they were also the majority of those who had their scores held when LSAC freezes the score because something looked off and they wanted to verify it before they released it. So in other words, a minority of test takers were generating most of the integrity problems. If you lay it out like that, it's not that LSAC's doing changes just to be difficult. They are looking at the real consequences of the previous format. Also, if they staff the testing center and have you take it in person, there are fewer technical issues, fewer proctoring issues, fewer interrupted tests. And so I think this change is good for you, all else being equal in the majority of cases. Of course, if you don't have a good at-home environment, it's beneficial for that as well. You just got to be able to commute to an in-person testing center. Now, let's talk about who still gets to take the LSAT remotely, because there are exceptions. It's on a limited case-by-case basis. If you qualify for medical or disability-related accommodations, if you have extreme hardship getting to a testing center, meaning that you're living very far away from the nearest one. Now, once you register for a specific LSAT date, you apply for the exception and submit your documentation through your lsac.org account. These requests take time. They take weeks, not just a couple of days. And so you apply for this the second you register. Don't wait till the week before the test. Now, there is another policy change as well going along with all of this. LSAC has changed how scheduling works. It used to be you register for the LSAT, then scramble for a good slot later. Now you get assigned a scheduling window based on the order in which you registered for the LSAT. It's basically first come, first served. And they literally described it as first to register, first to schedule. In other words, the earlier you register for a given LSAT testing date, the earlier your window opens, meaning you get a better shot at a testing center near you and finding a time that actually works for you. So you want to register early. LSAC says they're still adding more testing centers and appointments, which is great, but of course, the good seats at the more convenient testing locations will still fill up sooner, and those who register first get to pick first. So that's the in-person change. Now, taking the LSAT in person is a pretty significant difference, because if you're studying for the LSAT at home, you're taking your practice tests at home, and you're in your usual spot, your usual chair, your usual desk, the room's quiet, you've done 20 practice tests in that environment, and you're scoring great, but then testing day comes, you've got to go somewhere you've never been to before, in a part of town you had to map out the night before, in an unfamiliar chair, workstation with strangers all around. It could throw you for a loop, and that could lead you to a score drop. The typical student score drops at least 5 to 8 points from their practice test to the actual because of a nerves, anxiety, bad proctor, tech issues. And so the unfamiliar environment could be part of that drop, which means that you don't want to take your practice tests all in that cozy home setup. Starting today, I want you to deliberately put yourself somewhere a little bit worse than ideal. Maybe a library, a coffee shop with background noise you can't control, a desk that's not yours around people who move and cough and shuffle, because you want to train your focus to survive contact with the real world, because that's where you're going to take the actual thing. And you want to simulate test day with that in mind. You're also not taking breaks whenever you want, not having snacks whenever you want, not checking your phone in the middle of the test. This is the exams and endurance piece of how I teach this test. And it's the part that everybody underweights because it's uncomfortable and it doesn't feel like studying, but it is studying. Endurance is a skill, and you build it the same way you build everything else, by putting in the reps. Now, you want to also know what test day at a testing center is actually like, because the unknown is part of what makes people nervous. You show up at your assigned time and you go through check-in. You present a valid government-issued photo ID. The name on it has to match the name on your LSAT registration, so check that out today. Make sure it lines up. They're going to store your belongings for you in a locker. You're not going to keep your phone with you throughout the exam. You'll go through a security process before you sit down, which is to be expected, right? They want to check that you don't have anything on you, right? The test is going to be digital on a computer, a desktop computer, not a tablet, not an iPad, not a phone. It's going to be on a desktop computer, so be ready for that kind of keyboard, that kind of monitor as well. They're going to provide the scratch paper as well. Now, people forget that The staffed testing center is actually lower risk than your home, because at home, if the internet drops, that's your problem. If your computer overheats, that's your problem. If you have trouble installing the testing software, that's your issue as well. If you have a roommate, a significant other, family interrupting you, you've got a neighbor doing landscaping during your hardest passage, that's your problem. At a testing center, it's a more controlled environment. You're less likely to experience issues. Now, there is also a new LSAT testing interface. LSAC is already rolling that out inside the LSAC LawHub platform. LSAC keeps calling these minor user interface changes, but in the big picture, they're right, maybe, but minor's carrying some weight in that sense because some of those changes actually matter. A lot of what changed is actually good. There is a new reset response button on each question set, so one click wipes your selections and your eliminations and hands you a clean slate. They also changed up the question bar. Instead of showing only 10 questions the way it used to do in their previous preview, it shows the whole section at once, so they did listen to our feedback. You can now see your full landscape and jump around a lot more easily. For reading comp, that selection bar, the question bar, now marks which question numbers belong to which passage. The timer features are all back in as well. Anything you flag for review shows up right there on the bar as well. They brought that back too. There's more landing this month, including fully functional highlighting and underlining across the passage, the question stems, and the answer choices. They listen to us on that as well. If you mark up the text as you read, and you should be, those tools are not fully in place until that June release, which will still give you at least 4 weeks, maybe more with the finished version. It's tight, but it's still workable. But there is one change that is not so great, and they've already told us directly they are not going to change that. Bad news, unfortunately. In this new interface, you cannot select and eliminate answers in a single click the way you might be used to. LSAC has said this flat out. Because of how the underlying test driver platform is built, they can't give you what they called radio button functionality. In plain English, that means moving from selecting an answer to eliminating one takes an extra click. And they've said this cannot be changed. They're not going to change it, unfortunately. Now, if you're good at this test, you don't just pick answers. You work by elimination in many cases. On a hard logical reasoning question, your whole process is knocking out the wrong answers one by one until you're down to the credited response or down to a final two that you decide between. Elimination is a big part of how folks take practice questions on a multiple choice exam. Now, logical reasoning is 2/3 of your scored sections, 2/3 of your entire score. Reading comp is one section, the other third. Across the entire exam, you're looking at roughly 75 scored questions, and on the majority of them, probably, you're going to eliminate multiple choices. And if every elimination costs you an extra click compared to what you're used to, those clicks are going to pile up. It's like a tax. And that, of course, is not the entire difference between a 165 and a 175 by itself. I'm not going to oversell it, but this is a test where people will oftentimes miss the last question of a section because they ran out of time by just 20 seconds. So anything that adds friction to your most repeated motion is something that you want to handle in advance, not something you meet for the first time while the clock is running. And so the fix here I'm going to recommend for you is pretty simple. You practice your elimination workflow in the real new interface until that extra click is automatic, until you do it without even thinking. You don't want the first time you feel it to be question 14 of a scored section in an in-person testing center with your future on the line. And the only place you can practice this is the actual interface on the LSAC LawHub platform. In other words, I'll say this directly with no ambiguity, for your full-length practice tests and for your timed sections, for getting comfortable with the test day environment, I want you to practice in LawHub directly, the official LSAT platform, the one LSAC actually runs, not some third-party unofficial simulator, not some app that is trying to recreate LSAT questions on the fly. I want you to use the real thing, and this matters more than it ever has before because the interface has changed, and the only place on earth where you can practice in the exact current official interface you'll see on test day is LawHub. No third-party unofficial platforms, not studying out of a book, not studying out of ChatGPT, for God's sakes. LSAC has already loaded every single official practice test, around 60 of them, into that new interface. They built you a demo. They went out of the way to let you train it in the precise environment you'll actually test in, so take the gift for what it is. Now let's talk about what a third-party simulator actually is. It is some company's recreation of the LSAT screen, and for years, some of them were decent copies of the old interface, but the screen just changed. And so as of August 2026, a third-party simulator is by definition showing you a layout that's out of date the moment LSAC's new one has gone live. And remember the extra click I mentioned? This is exactly where it's going to hurt you. If your third-party platform still has the old smooth one-click select and eliminate, then every practice test you take it on is drilling a habit the real test is not going to let you use. You're building muscle memory for emotion that doesn't exist on your official LSAT. That is the opposite of preparation. Now, LawHub is giving you real, official, previously administered LSAT questions. There are some third-party platforms, not going to name names here, but some of them are running LSAT-style questions, which somebody wrote to look like the real thing, but they are not real LSAT questions. They don't have the precision, they don't have the trap structure, and the specific flavor of wrong answer the real test uses. If you practice on fake questions, you are training yourself to beat fake questions. Then the real one shows up with wrong answers that are subtler and meaner than what you're drilled against. Now, I'm not telling you that every third-party tool is garbage. A good course will teach you the concepts. A good drilling tool will help you grind a specific LSAT question type. A good explanation will get you unstuck when you can't figure out why you got something wrong. Now, coaching, which is what I do, is about strategy and the thinking behind the questions, and that goes on top of the materials, not inside the interface. So I want to draw a hard line here between learning and simulating. Learning the concepts, drilling weak question types, getting explanations, working with the coach, use whatever helps for that. But when it comes to simulating the test, especially full-length exams, you got to do that inside LawHub. A simulation is only worth something if it simulates the actual exam, and only LawHub has the actual interface. And there's no excuse not to do this. LawHub Advantage is only $120 for an entire year of access, and if you qualify for an LSAC fee waiver based on financial need, it's free. So I'm going to recommend, if you spend only $120 on your LSAT prep, spend it on LawHub before anything else. Open the demo, click around everything, find the reset response button, open and close the question bar, flag a question and watch where it shows up. The worst possible time to discover a button exists is midsection on the official LSAT with the clock ticking. Then try out that elimination workflow on purpose, because that's the extra click issue and it earns its own practice. You want to take a set of logical reasoning questions and force yourself to physically eliminate choices as you go. Also get familiar with that question bar I mentioned earlier. And of course, this is all just interface simulation. It's not the content of the test. If you want help analyzing your mistakes, simulating test day better, getting down to the root cause of what you're getting wrong and why you're getting it wrong, I'm happy to help you out. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. You can book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link to book that is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram. That is an open offer for everybody watching this now or later.